Firstly, thank you everybody for coming. It means a lot to us that you care about social values as much as we do. So we're here from Riot Games, and we're here to talk to you about understanding the social values of your players. Been told to remind you to just make sure you check your email for the mobile survey for this session. It should come to you towards the end of this session, and that feedback means a lot to us, and it helps GDC kind of learn what's good. Cool. So to get started, by way of introduction, my name is Tash. I'm a researcher at Riot Games. I've been there for about 2.5 years now. Before starting at Riot Games, I did my PhD in behavior and cognitive psychology.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Burrell, and I'm head of corporate social responsibility at Riot, or CSR for short. I've been at Riot for about 3.5 years now, and I've got a little bit of a mixed background. I've got one foot as an MBA, so I love capitalism. And then I've got one foot as a master's of public policy and administration, so I love fighting social injustices and doing things to support social causes. And so we also wanted to take just a moment to thank Christina Swanenberg for her tremendous help and support on this project as well. This is the agenda we just wanted to cover quickly with you guys today. First, we want to share a little bit about the context and background understanding of why we wanted to do this research in the first place. Then we'll dive into the methodology and some of the key findings that we had, and then wrapping with how we actually applied this research to creating real-world social outcomes with the players and community, and then finally sharing some key insights and lessons we learned along the way, hopefully that you can take with you going forward as well. At Riot, we consider ourselves a mission or a values-based and purpose-driven organization, and this is our mission. We aspire to be the most player-focused game company in the world. And like many game companies, being player-focused to us extends well beyond the game. And this includes everything from esports, to player support and how we answer tickets, to creating comics and music videos for players all around the world. And yes, with CSR, we think that there's a few natural and authentic things that we can do to add long-term value in the lives of our players, our communities, and the societies that we serve. But if you'll allow me, I wanted to take just a moment and address everyone here in the audience today and step up on the balcony and say that I think we in the video game industry are in a really unique position in the world today, in that we create products and experiences that gamers voluntarily spend dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of hours of their own personal time to engage at the peak of their ability to solve complex problems in real time. Think Celeste. They engage and collaborate with complete strangers to achieve common goals together with people they've never met. And they dive headfirst into exploring new worlds and uncharted lands. They min-max optimal build paths. And they do this all to take on that next challenge right on the horizon on hard mode. These are the same skills that educators and researchers have dubbed 21st century leadership skills. And they're highly attributed to being able to solve some of the world's most complex problems now and in the future that we don't know exist yet. So, I'm willing to argue that we have a tremendous opportunity as an industry in front of us, and that we can help change the narrative of what it means to be a core gamer for the millions of gamers who are out there. We need to change the narrative so that it's not something to be shunned from broader society, but rather embraced. It's because with these skills and the passions that gamers have, they will one day be able to inherit the world and leave a positive mark upon it, because they are practicing these leadership skills every single day. And we can change the narrative because what it means to be a core gamer is to have tenacity and resilience in the face of tremendous odds. I mean, how many of you have done a raid and you've failed after several hours and you're like, all right, let's try again tomorrow? It means that having a narrative of being a core gamer, you can apply creativity and adaptation to solve problems in ways you never even thought possible or even designed around. And yet gamers find unique ways of solving these issues. And the narrative of what it means to be a core gamer is to have an unrelenting yield for self-improvement. Just one more level, just one more match. Let me speed run this and I can get a better score. If I master this technique, I will surely get to gold, but that's not enough because I want platinum. Because that you get a cool, shiny, border or icon or something that helps you show off your skills. And so I think that we as an industry can help. And we can lead by example and show that what it means, the narrative of being a core gamer, is not just caring about a high score, but also means about caring about your fellow player. It means saying GG after a hard-fought and bruising defeat. And it means that you care about the communities that you're a part of and you serve, and there's natural things that you can do to help and give back. And so to all the core gamers in the audience here today, I say throw your shoulders back, hold your head high, and wear that as a mark of pride, because I think it's something worth honoring and respecting. And with that, really quick, now back onto the dance floor. This is my team's mission, is we aim to apply Riot's unique resources and strengths to create a positive and lasting impact. And we do that through 3 primary initiatives. The first is what we call personal karma. And this is designed to amplify the good that everyone who works at Riot already does. And so we empower programs and do connections and donation matching to amplify the good that writers are already doing, regardless of what it is that they personally care about. We just want to make it better. Then we have local karma. And we'll dive more into this here in a little bit, but local karma is all about partnering with local players and communities to create meaningful and deep connections and provide long-term value in the neighborhoods that we're in. And lastly, we have global karma. And the idea behind this one is we want to invest in organizations and outcomes that have bold ideas that we think will create a lasting impact on some intractable problems. As you can imagine, I'd love to talk about any one of these in detail, and I'm happy to afterwards. But right now, we have to focus on local karma, because that's really where the genesis of this research came to be. We have over 23, 24 offices around the world where we aim to apply local value to players in their own backyard and how they engage and interact with the world. And so as our mission with this of fostering those deeper connections, we needed to really understand the core question of what were the values, the social initiatives that our players cared about, and why. And really quick, the first question you want to ask is why? Why did we want to know this at all, according to Simon Sinek? And the first answer is because gamers are already tremendously caring and compassionate. They reach out to game companies and each other all the time to help get activated and engaged, everything from charity streams. They put up complete strangers in their homes during times of crises because you're a gamer too. And they even pick up another player after a bad game and say, dust yourself off, let's queue up again and we can make it. So the demand is there. Players are already asking and want to get engaged to creating this social impact. And additionally, as I said before, is I fundamentally believe to the core of my being that gamers can and will change the world. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to start with all things that we do at Riot, and that's to start with the player. But really importantly, and I can't emphasize this enough, is we wanted to start where the players are, not where we wanted them to be or what we wanted to project upon them, but to really understand what's going on in the day-to-day lives that they're going through every day and what are their hopes and dreams for the future. And so because of that, we really wanted to deeply understand what were the social values that our players cared about all over the world. And then, of course, the next question is how? How do you go about doing this? Because as you can imagine, talking about social values is really tricky across cultures and countries. Because what matters to a lot of players here in the United States is vastly different than those in, say, Brazil, versus China, versus Germany, versus Korea, versus Turkey, versus all over the world. And so we also had a hypothesis where that everybody cares about something, but not everybody cares about the same things equally. So we needed to really understand not only the breadth of social values that our players cared about, but also how deeply they may care about each one. And so ultimately what we wanted to do was we wanted to apply the same rigor and due diligence to CSR research as we do to any other game or product decision at Riot. We wanted to be really data informed, not necessarily data driven, but informed so that we could make more robust and impactful decisions to add values to the lives of players everywhere. And so what we needed was a framework. We needed something that we could talk about these values across cultures. And luckily, the UN had just what we were looking for, so we didn't have to invent anything. These are the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, these are goals set forth by the UN that address everything from ending poverty, to fighting social injustices, to protecting the planet, and ensuring prosperity for all. They've been adopted by countless governments, nonprofits, and a lot of for-profit organizations, all to collaborate together so that we can move humanity to the next chapter of progress. And so luckily, we saw this, and it was able to converse around various issues that we thought players would care about, and they were a framework that we could use to parse through some data. And so we took the list and we slightly modified it a little bit, because if you're not familiar with any of these, you may not necessarily know what we're talking about. So we just cleaned it up a little bit, but then we were armed with how we wanted to engage players on the social values they cared about.
Cool. Research story time. So we'd never measured players' social values before at Riot, and for this reason, we wanted to take multiple creative approaches to explore this space. So our research was divided into two parts. We had a focus group, which allowed us to really get out there and talk to players and really dive deep into what players care about. And then we also had a survey, which allowed us to reach around 3,000 players across 7 different regions. So first, I really want to show you an activity that we created for the focus group. So, discussing social values is not always easy, especially in front of strangers in this focus group environment. So we wanted to make players feel comfortable. And we devised a method that combined League of Legends with the expression of social value. So for those of you who aren't familiar with League of Legends, each game, a player picks a champion, and that champion can have up to 5 abilities. And we asked players to design their own champion, but with a twist. Their champion should have up to 5 world-saving abilities that map back onto their social values. And we made it clear that these shouldn't map onto gameplay in any way. That's not what we were expecting of them. And so I really want to show you some examples now because it turned out awesome. So this is Sir Bunnington, and he was created by a player in Dublin. The handwriting may be a little hard to read, so I'll point out a couple of them for you. So Sir Bunnington's E, Climatize, allows him to stop global warming. And his ultimate ability, Here Comes the Money, provides players with well-paid and happy jobs. And as you can see, these can be pretty clearly mapped back onto the SDGs of climate action and job and economic growth. And as you can see from the right here, his abilities map onto multiple SDGs, and we were able to talk to this player about what these were and why he really cared about them. And this is Poncho, and Poncho's abilities really just map onto one SDG of good health and mental well-being. One of our favorite abilities is his Calm Palm, which is big hand here, and this hits angry people until they feel calm. Makes sense. And another ability, or the feels, is warmth. And this provides lonely people with the warmth of their good memories. And this little guy is Eternal. And Eternal is much more practical. He fixes things from broken machines to computers to rivers, and even removes harmful bacteria from food. So just to bring these together, these kind of illustrate why the focus groups were so important to us in this topic, because we really got to get out there, talk to players, and after they'd presented the champion to us and the group, we really talked in detail about some of these issues. And from a craft perspective, it really allowed us to let them open up, and without just straight up asking them like, hey, what's your social value? So this was really cool. And we'll talk about some of the learnings from this at the end. So we were really inspired by how open they are with some of these issues, and we really saw that some of them meant a lot to players. And so for this reason, we wanted to kind of reach further. So we created a survey that, as I said, reached about 3,000 players in 7 regions. And the key thing here is that we still wanted to be creative. So even though they're not in a focus group environment and it's probably less awkward to answer a survey online, we still wanted to be creative with the information that we're asking of them. So for this, we created the 3 Wishes survey. And in this survey, we asked them to tell us their top 3 wishes for League of Legends, for themselves, for their country, and for the world. But to keep it focused, wishes for their country and the world were based on the SDGs that Jeff just showed you. So what were the results? Well, we found that globally there were some goals that players valued more so than others, which you may expect for the demographic. And those were quality education and job training, good health and mental well-being, and employment opportunities. And in a follow-up study, we really wanted to understand what they meant when they selected these categories. So we really dove deep into subcategories. And importantly, here we found that what they meant was post-secondary education, including college and university, mental health, including depression and anxiety, and this one was particularly prominent, and inclusive economic growth. So that was really helpful for us to see globally what can we do for our players as a whole. But as we know, that's just one part of the picture, and each country has its own social values based on historical and cultural experiences. And so if we break down some of the results that we saw on a country basis, as you can see, here in the US, one of the top goals was quality education and job training, with 39% of players picking this as a top 3 value. And this was followed by good health and mental well-being and no poverty. And those of you who are from the US might be familiar with these as some goals that you really care about. However, when we look at Brazil, and this is where it's really important for us to understand these regional differences, we see a greater prominence in quality education and job training. So our Brazilian players, 73% of respondents picked quality education and job training as a top 3 value. And the other 2 were slightly different from the US as well, those being sustainable employment opportunities and innovative infrastructure. And again, when we look at Turkey, we see a completely different picture, with no poverty being their number 1 value. And so just to bring that together, as I said, it's easy for us to assume that globally there are 3 goals that players really care about, and that's what we should do to serve them. But really, that's not the case. Looking into the regional data is so important to us as well. And as Jeff mentioned earlier, one of the missions of our team is to connect with players who are local and foster meaningful relationships. And we feel that this is the way to do that, really understanding them where they're at. So Jeff is going to talk to you now about some of the ways that we use this research locally and globally to really create some value in there. So thank you.
Tash. So now that we were armed with this data, what do you do? How would we go about actually then saying, okay, here's how we can engage? And one of the first things that we did was actually go to those regional offices I had talked about earlier and say, hey, here's what we have found in ways that you could potentially engage local players with local causes that they care about. Because we figure that those offices would have much more knowledge and autonomy into making those decisions on what they thought was best for their players. And one of the results that we saw from this was our Oceania office partnered with Headspace. It's a national Australian youth foundation focused on mental health awareness and prevention and interventions. And so what they did was they partnered with Headspace during a week of their OPL esports broadcast. And during the week of this broadcast, they had people on to help share awareness on issues regarding mental health, to help educate on where to find help, what resources were available, and even potential warning signs that you might find within yourself or your friends. And they even had pros go on and publicly state what a healthy headspace meant to them and how they kept a cool head during times of high competitive stress. This was actually really enlightening and touching to see. And additionally, rioters in our Dublin office have started to engage with Coder Dojo. This is an Irish national youth nonprofit that focuses on getting kids tech education skills. And so the rioters in this office have done everything from hosting coding jams into the local office, and you can see some of the kiddos interacting right there and learning how to just use basic coding skills and getting more comfortable with technology. They've started to provide mentorship into some disadvantaged youth into pursuing careers into tech and the video games industry. And the whole office even pitched in for a 24-hour helpathon where they did everything from a whole backlog of projects that the nonprofit wanted to engage on, but hadn't had the time. So they translated a bunch of learning materials into new languages to reach thousands of new kids the world over. They redesigned the logo, and they even helped them overhaul their website to reach more streamlined kids around the world. And we've also begun to use this research on a global level as well. What we have talked about before was how we can start to engage on a local issue, but one global example of how we used this was last year we held a global fundraiser for the players around the world. And it was one of those where it's like, hey, if you buy this item in game, it'll go to help support a charity pool. But what we really wanted to do with this campaign was to align in players' mind that their decisions mattered in real-world social outcomes. And so we had players vote on one of 3 organizations that they could go to support. The winning nonprofit got 50% of the overall charity pool, and the other 2 got 25% each. So it's still a rising tide for all boats. But here was the kicker, was the players' vote was actually amplified by their in-game honor level, or how sportsmanlike they were. So if they were just a really strong Samaritan and a great teammate and someone who was just a really positive influence on the community, their vote counted more than someone who may be, say, a toxic jerkbag, the technical term. And so what we really wanted to do was, the whole premise of this campaign was to give players that sense of ownership and agency. And we had to use this research as a starting point so that we could go and select these organizations that we thought had a global appeal to them, and yet one wouldn't be completely run away from another. They had to really internalize in the player's mind, this is what I want to go into support. And as a community, this is what we can achieve together. And so we were actually kind of nervous when we were running this campaign. Was this even a good idea? How would players respond? And what were the results? And I'm still just gobsmacked by what the community was able to do. They had raised over $2.4 million for these charities. They were extremely happy in some follow-up research into the organizations that they were able to select and vote on. And over 80% of them wanted future similar events like this going forward. And what was just really touching to me was, after the fact, I'm talking with the organizations and the nonprofits, and they saw a spike in traffic and donations directly to them outside of the in-game campaign. It turns out that players were rallying their friends, their family, their schoolmates, and their local communities to go and support these organizations on their own because it mattered so much to them. And so this only fuels my conviction in the decency and compassion of gamers all over the world who are willing to help hundreds of thousands of lives of people they'll never meet. And with that, we wanted to share a couple of key learnings that we learned along the way that we'd want to share with all of you. And the first is that it's really important to us to apply the same level of research and due diligence into our CSR activities as we do any other game or product decision. There's a lot of research out there that shows being authentic with your CSR activities is really important. And so what we found was, by using this data-informed process, we can create strengthened connections between our players and our communities to create long-term value and trust together. Additionally, we found that using our IP to facilitate a conversation is immensely helpful. These are not easy issues to talk about around the dinner table, let alone with complete strangers. But the fact that we were all together and all gamers and had that in common and said, hey, you know, what matters to you? What are your goals and aspirations in the game? That allowed us to connect on a human-to-human level and really open up some deep and insightful conversation. And additionally, allowing player agency into these social outcomes. This was something that exceeded my personal wildest expectations on what we could achieve together as a community and as a whole. And we found that players really, really resonated with this, and were asking and wanting a lot more of these going forward. And so with that, we wanted to open up for any questions that we have right now. And of course, Tash and I will be right outside if anyone wants to catch us afterwards to talk. Thank you all so much for coming and spending time with us today.
Hi.
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 What percentage of your user base got engaged with this?
So of the engagement rate in participating regions was around north of 20%.
Right, quite a lot, a fifth.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Hi, thanks for this talk. Can you see a way that the social values priorities that you identified amongst the player base could complete the circle and influence Riot Games game design?
Yeah, that's a really robust question. I think that what it is how we approach all other sort of things is we like to be player informed. So as you can imagine, we don't necessarily only have research on the social values of what our players use, but also what kind of comics they like, what sort of movies do they like. And I think all of that factors in to how we think we can best add value in the lives of players all over the world in future products and any sort of things that we create in the future. I think it's definitely a component, but not necessarily solely driven by that.
Do you think there's a correlation between games that exhibit the social values they prioritize and purchase intent?
Sorry, can you explain?
Do you think people are more likely to buy a game that exhibits the social values that they prioritize?
I have a hypothesis around that. I think it's a little bit early for us, but if you look at some of the research out there, particularly among millennials, is they are far more likely to engage with products and companies and decisions that support strong, sustainable social outcomes than those that may not necessarily do.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned the use of the IP was valuable, but how do you know that? Did you try some IP-neutral experiments that had less success, or did you just kind of assume that it was better? I'm just kind of curious.
That's a good question. We actually ran some kind of practice labs for this, and internally, and it was very awkward to open up with just like, hey, so we're here to talk about social values, let's go. And I think one of the things is, especially with players, when they come into our lab, they are expecting to play a new champion or see a new a new game system. And obviously they come into Riot, it looks really cool, and we wanted to kind of break the ice in that way. So although we didn't practice with players, I do believe based on our internal kind of tests of it that it was the most comfortable way to open up. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. Regarding some of the sustainable development initiatives you talked about, I admit I'm a bit more cynical than you are about groups of gamers and how they interact with things. And I feel like there are a lot of people, some gamers included, not all, that act in opposition, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to those sustainable initiatives. Do you feel that it's important to reach out to those gamers to try to get them on board with these things and encourage them both inside and out of the game to explore why those things are important and helpful to a lot of people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How I see it is that this is an issue just with humans in general, right? Like I am an eternal optimist, unfortunately, but I think that it's really important. What we're doing is talking about adaptive change, about mobilizing entire communities of people to address big challenges in front of them. And I think that you need to listen to all of the voices within the system, whether they're your strongest advocates or your biggest deterrents. And so I think that what normally doesn't work, what I've seen in terms of politics or business or any kind of activity like this, is a heavy hand is not necessarily what's needed, but more of that idea of understanding, of communicating and opening and listening up and trying to show what the benefit of being thoughtful and caring brings. But ultimately, at the end of the day, these are individual humans who make their own decisions. And I think that as part of my, a little bit of a rallying cry up forward is, we can help show by example of how to engage in our, communities and everything like that to show that there is a stronger and more powerful way out there.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to that, sorry, I just want to say that I think it's a great question because I love that I love to reach out to players and let them know what we care about as a company. And the charitable event that Jeff showed you ran in client at peak time, and that was our way of being like, hey, this is what we care about. These are our values as a company, and we really hope that that kind of shines through to players, and that's what we stand for. So, would love for next steps to be more outreach for that kind of stuff.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Is the relatively low sample size of 3,000 reflective of the sort of mandate to be data informed rather than data driven? And then is that made easier because the core values are in line with the results and you're more confirming your values at that point?
Yeah, so in terms of sample size, we had about 400 players per region, and that tends to be representative of the players in those regions. That's what we tend to do for all surveys. We find that if we do any more than that, we kind of get a diminishing return on investment for that. So we do find that therefore represents the players in that region. And then to kind of go on to the practical side, when we do go out and we, like you saw Headspace in Australia, when they go and do kind of interact with players in those regions, we do get a big kind of warming towards it. So yeah, right, for the moment it seems to be working. So that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I was curious about the weighting system for the voting on the fundraiser. I was curious about that. I was wondering, did you guys think about how it accounts for maybe people with language issues, like maybe they're on the spectrum, and maybe people might just misinterpret, their communication in general.
Right.
So how do you guys account for that? Did you consider that in weighting voters' value?
Yeah, so we worked in strong collaboration with our player behavioral team, and they're a group of a bunch of really, talented behavioral researchers and scientists. And so we didn't want to graft on something just for a social value purpose, but really make it a natural extension of it, if that kind of makes sense. So we used the existing honor system that they've already designed in terms of, for those of you unfamiliar, after the game, you can honor someone for being, just GG, really player friendly, to being a strong leader and having good communication skills, or having tenacity and resilience in the face of tremendous odds. And so we used that framework of saying, as you go along, it does account a little bit for language differences or all that. It's just how you are in game, not necessarily, you trying to game the honor system so you get a higher vote, if that kind of makes sense. It's just a natural extension of that.
So it's based on the gameplay behavior, not necessarily language.
That's right.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Hi.
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 As a fellow researcher, would Riot be interested in sharing their modified SDG as well as potentially comparing notes on different game titles and IPs?
We would love to share the modified list.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially, we took the SDGs and just dumbed down the language a little bit, and kind of made it more digestible. But we're always looking to expand out and to collaborate with others, so we can.
And we can definitely connect after.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, show you that.
Great. Well, Tash and I will be right outside. But thank you guys so much. It means so much for us.
Thank you.